What makes a human capable of evil and a tiger not? Imagine that both a man and a tiger intend to each kill one of two genetically identical girls. Say they are the uncle and pet, respectively, of identical twins. Let's assume, after the killings, that both could have done otherwise in a metaphysically open way. That is, they were not determined to kill the girls since the beginning of time, and things could have turned out otherwise. What difference between them makes the uncle's act of killing his niece immoral, and the tiger's act of killing a genetically identical girl not immoral, but instead amoral? The tiger, even though it could have killed the girl in this way or that way, was not responsible for wanting to kill in a first-order way because it had a killer's nature that it did not choose to have in a second-order way. A tiger's nature is beyond its control. It's beyond its ability to change, in part because it lacks second-order desires to change its character. It lacks the ability and freedom to change its character. The girl's uncle, however, we assume, has a nature that he did in part choose to develop into one capable of becoming a person who would do such heinous acts. We assume that the capacity to work on his character was, to at least some degree, under his control in the past, and we assume that he could have and should have had second-order wants to change for the better, having been taught right and wrong as a child. In short, the tiger had a capacity to do otherwise, but not to be otherwise than he was when he committed the act of killing, whereas the uncle could have and therefore should have been otherwise than he was when he committed the murder. We attribute evil and moral responsibility to the uncle, but not to the tiger because of attributions of type 1 and type 2 libertarian free will to the uncle, but only type 1 libertarian free will to the tiger, and a capacity for second-order desires to the uncle, but no such second-order desires to the tiger. Even if the uncle could not have helped but be a murderer at the instant that he committed the murder, we lay blame on him nonetheless for becoming a person who could murder. We blame him not for what he now is, namely being a murderer. Instead, we blame him for not having realized his potential to become a different kind of person than the murderous type of person he in fact did become, back when he could have done something about cultivating his character. The link between a type 2 libertarian free will and type 2 wants or intentions is essential. We will only devise a plan to reform our character if we want to change who we are. But where do second-order wants about ourselves come from? I believe our second-order wants arise from the same capacities to imagine and reason that makes humans so very, very different from a tiger or even from our nearest extant relatives, the chimpanzees and bonobos. For example, if I run out of firewood and my children freeze, am I to blame, even if there's simply no wood available anymore in the middle of winter? Their suffering is not because of anything I do now or can do now. There's simply no wood available now, so I have no choice about the matter now. I can't make a fire now if it's physically impossible to do so. My children's present suffering is because I failed to prepare for winter several months or even years ago when I could still have procured wood easily back in the summer. So even if no wood is available now, their freezing is still in part my fault because I could have done something about this long ago, and I could have and should have imagined just this scenario of potentially running out of wood in advance and prepared myself for it when I could have. Similarly, type 2 volitional control does not apply to our present character. We cannot change ourselves right now just by imagining ourselves to be different than we are. That would be wishful thinking. But volitional control does apply to our internal imagined model of our present character, which is not identical to our present character. That's because one is a model and the other is real. Having this capacity to imagine, we can model ourselves and we can model our future. The model is symbolic and abstract insofar as it refers to our future selves or ideal selves, which do not exist in the form that we imagine them now. We can model or imagine our future self and come up with a plan to make an optimal future self happen. We can then compare our progress toward our ideal self by comparing our present state with that modeled self, and when we deviate, we can correct our path toward that future goal. A tiger, in contrast to a human being, cannot want to change itself because it cannot imagine a different self. But we can and do imagine future selves, and even if we do not cultivate one of the best selves that lies within our innate potential to realize, that was a choice too, because we could have done otherwise and therefore played a role in our not turning out otherwise than we now are. Plans that change character typically depend on binding ourselves to character-changing activities, whether going to the gym or sticking to a vow. The most famous example of such binding is the case where Ulysses knew that he would be tempted by the Siren's song. Here's a painting by William Eddy, painted in 1837, depicting the event. The Sirens were mermaids of sorts who called to sailors, who would then go mad with desire for them, jump into the sea, and then die in their attempt to get to their island and satiate their desires. Ulysses had his men tie him to the mast because he wanted to experience the songs and the desires they evoked, but did not want to succumb to those desires. He had his men stuff their ears with wax so that they could not hear his likely future commands to set him free when he eventually heard the Sirens calling him to come to them. He wanted to hear them, but did not want to jump into the ocean to his likely death. So he told his men in advance to ignore his possessed commands that he foresaw himself giving in the future, and when he did hear the Sirens call, and did go mad with uncontrollable desire for them, and when he did command his men to set him free from being bound to the mast, he was ignored by them. He had set up his life when he was not subject to temptation, so that he would be constrained from giving in to temptation when he was weak and unable to resist it. This form of preparation for the future is possible in a human, but not in a tiger. It's possible in a human because we can imagine a different future self than the one we now are, and plot a path either toward or away from the imagined future self and our future self's decisions. Imagination gave rise to the possibility of morality and immorality, of good and evil. Once acts became symbolized, they could now stand for and be instances of abstract classes of actions such as good, evil, right, or wrong. Symbolic thought permitted new dimensions of behavior, for example, the expression of territoriality over the ownership of an idea, rather than just concrete things like turf or a mate. Thus, while a tiger has affection, social intelligence, likes, dislikes, fears, inhibitions, territoriality, deceit, aggression, vengefulness, and other predispositions that govern its behavior, these are not moral dispositions, and they do not comprise anything like a true morality. A tiger lacks moral judgment, prohibitions, norms, principles, laws, approval, disapproval, injunctions, the concept of good, the concept of wrong, rights, rules, virtues, or vices. A tiger lacks morality because it lacks symbolic imagination. This is why tigers are amoral rather than immoral. They can kill a girl, but cannot murder a girl. They cannot conceive of doing right or wrong. This is why we do not put tigers in prison or try to reason with them after they kill a girl. Instead, we punish them soon after an offending act to create associations between behaviors and consequences, or if we worry that the tiger will do it again, we simply kill it. There's no reasoning with a tiger. The uncle, on the other hand, not only killed his niece, he murdered her, and can be blamed for his immoral act and for playing a role in having chosen to develop the kind of character capable of such a crime, or in not having cultivated a character for whom such an act would have been unthinkable.